Welcome to Design to Move, a weekly functional movement series reviewing common movement impairment syndromes, muscle imbalances, and injury cycles and how to correct for them. Don't just exercise, but restore optimal movement. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Design to Move. My name is Ryan Maxwell, this is Ryan Parr, and our newest movement specialist, Chad Shugart. We're going to talk to you guys about another distortion pattern. This has to do with the impingement of the rotator cuff at the shoulder. This is called subacromial impingement. A lot of times people get pain in their shoulder because the space between the shelf of the shoulder joint and the head of the humerus becomes compressed, and this starts to break down the actual connective tissue of the tendons from the rotator. So today we're going to show you how to adjust some of the major relationships that distort the placement of the shoulder so that we can get it back to its natural alignment and reduce the pain, inflammation, and impingement that goes on. For that, you're going to need one of our fancy-dancy fluid fast release balls. If you don't have something like this, you can purchase it online on our website, but you could probably use another ball of some sort. This one's got a nice little tack to it. So either way, remember guys that we do write a blog on the topic. It's in the description below. We give you more information about the specifics. And we do have a table of contents to the side here where we timestamp all of the segments with a condensed version at the bottom so that you can skip to that as a review once you've gone through it a couple times. If you have questions on anything that we're going to go over today, or if you want a specific movement screen, we do that virtually and for free. You can reach out to us at admin@fluidhealthandfitness.com. On that, we have a lot to go over, so we're going to get into subacromial impingement, and we're going to get started with our release. Our first segment is release and mobility. This time we're going to go into the pecs and the latissimus dorsi, specifically the pec major, the bigger of the pecs, and the big lat muscle on the side of the torso. Let's get right to it. All right, so we're going to get Chad into his pec major, and he's got to use this ball. We're going to press him against the wall. We got to get him set up for the position. So if you're doing this from home, this is what you're going to need to do.
Yeah, so right now he's starting off on the inside of the chest near the sternum, and then he's going to roll the ball towards the outside. Also noticing that he has a nice split stance. Whenever he has this arm coming back, he has the opposite or that same side leg going forward. From here, he's making sure that he squeezes the glute on the right, and then as he's breathing out, he's retracting the shoulder, reaching forward. As he's breathing in, he's relaxing and sinking back into the ball again. And he's going through a number of different reps, and we'll give you a little bit more breakdown on what's exactly happening here.
Yeah, so as he goes through that arm position, he's drawing the arm around, or the scapula around his rib cage. So he's using the muscles that retract the shoulder blade down and back as he pulls his arm back. So what he's trying not to do is pull the arm back so far that his arm starts to internally rotate. Now remember, if the scapula doesn't have enough glide or posterior glide, that means that there's going to be a potential of it knocking in, or that arm rolling into the head of the acromion. Now again, that's the joint where the collarbone meets up with the scapula. So that's where that humeral head resides, just underneath of that in a little glenoid socket. So if that gets rotated back too far and the pec is too tight, it has a tendency to roll the humerus forward and then pull the scapula with it, increasing or decreasing the space of that cavity and then leading to the impingement. So what you're going to make sure is as you draw that arm back, you're going to glide it around the ribs. You're going to keep the rib cage down by bracing those ribs down, and you're going to only open the arm up until you see the shoulder begin to want to shrug or rotate internally and inferiorly. If you see that, that's a good indicator to stop, because it's actually going to make the area even more sensitive. So as you breathe out, it'll stretch through the pec, draw the sternum down, and then as you breathe in, you'll sink and allow that ball to sit into the tissue. And then you'll notice that you can get deeper and deeper into the fibers, and then you get more extension out of that muscle. Okay, so that's your pec. You're gonna shoot for about a minute or two on either side, and then we would get to the lats. So the lats, or the latissimus dorsi, are the muscles that basically extend the arm behind you, so they pull the arm back when they flex. They also help to internally rotate the arm. So the muscle attaches back here at the thoracolumbar fascia. It sweeps around the thorax, comes up under the armpit. It will lay on top of the scapula, or the shoulder blade, comes around and then attaches into the humerus up the top of the arm. Now again, when it flexes, it pulls the arm back, it internally rotates, and it helps to hyperextend the lower back. A lot of us, because of our pelvic positioning, have overengaged latissimus muscles. They help to support the pelvis more than they should. and that will impact the shoulder placement. So we want to get that out of there. So when you identify where you want to put that ball for the soft tissue drill, you're going to want to make sure that you stay in the belly of the muscle around the chest wall, almost up to the pec, and you're going to be underneath the scapula. So you don't want to be directly on the scapula, you want to be underneath in the belly of the muscle. So Chad's going to put the ball there, and he's going to get into a position on the wall so that his body would resemble how he would look when that muscle would be in a state of stretch. And this would be when his arm would be outreached into flexion, right? His arm would be coming up and he would be doing the opposite of that internal rotation. So he's supinating the palm. Now again, this would look just like running or gait or walking. His arm is outstretched out in front. His opposite, or the same side of the body, the leg, is going to go back into extension, and he's going to make sure that he stabilizes his pelvis by clenching his glute. That glute's going to help to stabilize the hip, and he's going to breathe in as he draws that arm up, and then breathe out and relax the arm back down, sinking into the belly of the muscle. So this is again a soft tissue mobilization drill using an active release of the latissimus. Now again, what we're going to want to be mindful of is if you're in an acute acromial impingement stage and that shoulder is painful, putting more pressure on that muscle will pull that arm internally and maybe even aggravate it. So if you're feeling that, number one, if there is pain at all and it lasts for more than 7 days, you probably should go see a physician, number one. Okay, medical disclaimer. Okay, but if it's not and you put pressure into that and it makes the front of that shoulder shelf or maybe even the back of the shoulder shelf start to tweak out a little bit, then reduce the pressure on the ball and make sure you don't lift the arm up as high. Okay, only stay within a pain-free range of motion. You don't want to provoke it by actually making it even more irritated. That's the exact opposite of what we're trying to do, right? So again, he's going to breathe in, draw the arm up into flexion, supinate the palm, draw the other arm back around, engage the lat on the opposite side. So this one wants to let go a little bit and then come back down, breathe out, and then just fall into the ball. Notice his hips are nice and stable. He's got a diagonal lean into the wall so he has enough pressure. And each time he lets go, he can fall back into the ball. Nicely done. So that's going to be for, again, another about minute, 2 minutes on either side. It feels really good. You'll notice that as you go through this, your arm can go up higher and higher, and you may not get as much pinching, or hopefully no pinching, and that'll allow you again to help get that shoulder blade back where it belongs as you draw the arm up overhead. That brings us to the end of lats. Our next segment is activation. Here's where we show you how to engage muscles that are traditionally underactive. Normally because the muscles are too tight and pulls it into length. And this one is actually not directly related to the shoulder. It's going to be the transverse abdominis, the muscle that holds your ribs down. Rib cage position is very important when it comes to acromial space. So we're going to make sure that we target that today. So let's get to it. All right, so we got Chad on the table here, and we're going to get into our transverse abdominis. It's the deeper abdominal muscle. It helps to support our pelvis. And again, the question is, why are we addressing the abdominals in relationship to the shoulder joint? Why is that important?
Because everything on the body is connected, and we specifically know that there is a large balance center at the pelvis. And if you were to do this at home, if you were just to bring the pelvis underneath and squeeze the glutes, you're going to notice that the shoulders start to actually come back and sit into a better position. And if you bring the pelvis forward, you're going to notice the weight shifts on your toes, and the ribs collapse and the shoulders start to come forward. So one thing that we want to be aware of is that if we don't have enough abdominal strength, it starts to affect the motion of the shoulder. So the first thing that we want to have in place is this strong structural stability at the core. So that way when we do use the shoulders as we go into more complex movements, they're safe, stable, and they move in a better fashion.
Yeah, absolutely. So he's going to engage his transverse abdominis, pull his ribs downward. So they're going to go in and down inferiorly. Remember, the abdominals attach 5th to 12th rib around the transverse and the external obliques. Okay, so we're going to pull that down. And then as he does that, really overemphasize it here, Chad. Breathe out deep. You'll notice that the shoulders start to roll forward. On expiration, the shoulders rotate internally, so they depress and go internal. When you breathe in, hyperextend, arch the back, the shoulders go into protraction and they elevate. So that's the mechanics of the scapulothoracic rhythm, and understanding that if your back is hyperextended, you're gonna have a tendency to have the shoulders lifted, right? So they're gonna go into protraction, or rather retraction in elevation. Now that's not their normal position. So if I go down into a flexed position, the shoulder is gonna go down with it, it's elevated and now it's rotated forward. And that again is where we start to see the impingement cycle occur. So what we're trying to do here is orient the ribs, get the abs to pull the ribs down, and then glide your shoulders back towards your spine and depress them down. There's a counter pressure there, right? So the flexors of the abdominals or of the spine is pulling the ribs down, and the extensors or the retractors of the shoulders are working against that. So do you feel that, Chad? So what we want to do is try to lay those arms nice and flat. Palms are going to come up into supine position. You're going to breathe out hard, get all the air out, tuck the chin, hold the abdominal pressure, and then breathe in, retract the scapula, breathe out, flex the abs. Breathe in, retract the scapula, breathe out, flex the abs. So basically what we're doing is stretching through your pectoral girdle with every breath. You breathe out, the shoulders are gonna wanna pull forward, but you're pulling back against that and it's gonna stretch that pec girdle. So it's gonna help you to get those shoulders down and back. And again, the goal here is to recognize that if the shoulders are elevated and your upper traps are over-engaged, when you breathe in, the shoulder's gonna wanna shrug and the neck's gonna wanna kick up. So we wanna contain that by working the deep cervical flexors, tuck the chin, pull the head back into the table, right? Breathe out and pull that shoulder back so that you don't extend and kick that neck up, okay? Doing that again for about 2 minutes, the time under tension should help to alleviate some of the pressure. You'd be surprised after about 2 minutes, the arms start to fall flatter. You don't feel like it's such a strained position to try to fight it, and then it'll set your shoulders up for the next activity. So do this for about 2 minutes, breathe in for 2, breathe out for 6, try to depress and retract the shoulders. And again, as you breathe in, make sure your chin's tucked and you're pushing your head into the ground or the table without creating extra strain around the neck. If you have questions, again, reach out to us at admin@fluidhealthandfitness.com. Third segment is integration. Integration is about sequencing multiple muscle groups to fire in the order that they're supposed to create efficient movement. So today we're going to show you how to get into another gait pattern with a single leg balance position where we work on the mechanics of the scapula around a fixed rib cage position. This is called scapulothoracic rotation. And we're going to show you how to do that with an exercise band. So we got Chad set up for a single leg balance position. You'll notice that we've got this exercise band anchored to the wall at about the height of his eye line. And he's gonna use just a little bit of extension pressure to draw the arm back behind him. Now remember, if the shoulder is unstable and there's a propensity towards this internal inferior rotation, and again, abduction of the scapula, meaning that it's rotating away from the spine, there's a chance that when you draw your arm back like this, the humerus is gonna rotate forward and internally. And that's where we're gonna see that decrease in the acromial space. So that's something to keep in mind as we do this movement. We wanna be very precise about the ability to hold that scapula isometrically back into retraction and depression. So think about doing the opposite of a shrug. You're gonna depress, okay? Now that's gonna use the serratus muscle that we're gonna target in the last segment here, but we're gonna depress that shoulder down. And what we're gonna try to do is an opposing action. The ribs are gonna come inward into protraction by engaging his external oblique. You're rotating almost the torso inward, and then the shoulder is gonna rotate against it behind the torso. So if the pec is too tight, guess where that torso is gonna go? It's gonna go with it. So you're gonna actually rotate open through the ribs. So that's a good indication that this guy is too tight. It's grabbing from the arm, gripping from the sternum and opening your body up. Now that's exactly what we don't want to do. We want to isometrically stabilize the rib by engaging the oblique on that side and then glide the arm around. Now that's exactly what you do when you walk. As you bring your leg up into flexion, the pelvis will drop down, the back will start to go into flexion, and you'll start to use your abdominal on that side to help to support the ribs. Okay, so that's going to pull the rib down. So he's gonna, again, pull that leg up, pull the arm back behind him into extension, and really work on the small isolated mechanics of the external rotation of the shoulder. Now, if you notice that you're moving more through the rib than the arm, then we're kind of defeating the purpose here. So I'm gonna have Chad clench that ab down harder still, and then glide the shoulder around it in a more isometric fashion. There you go, that's perfect. You'll also notice that his head is directly in line with his shoulder joint, and the shoulder joint is in line with his hip bone, the greater trochanter. And that's gonna show up as a perfect vertical center of mass. That way he can move his body in the way it's intended. And you'll also notice that as he lifts the leg up in deflection, that his other hip bone doesn't rotate outward. So what you'll notice again is if he lifts this leg up too high, the opposite hip might actually start to go the other direction or even this way, open. Okay, so if it starts to open up and your other opposite pelvis rotates this way, again, you're starting to lose form and stability through the pelvis. So do not do that. Make sure that you only lift the leg as high as you can without the external rotation in the opposite hemisphere, okay? So doing that will allow you to isolate the scapular retractors. Hopefully you'll be able to work some of the depressors of that shoulder, and it'll help to get the realignment of the shoulder blade in relationship to the global kinetics that are happening during gait. Okay, so we would do 2 sets of 20 repetitions on both sides. Make sure to move in a pain-free range of motion, and that would bring us to the end of this position. Our last segment is strength. Here's where we show you how to target muscles that specifically need to be stiffened, or their passive tone, where they fall, needs to be increased. So what we're gonna do is target the anterior serratus muscle. It helps to depress and retract the shoulder back and down to increase the space for the humerus to move in. So let's get to it. All right, so the last move that we're gonna do is called a serratus press. So this is the anterior serratus press. It's a position where it's a pressing position. So basically what it does is it initiates the positioning of the shoulder when you go into a push or a pull. Now remember, the serratus muscle is a muscle that fans up from your rib cage underneath your scapula. It allows your shoulder to protract, but in rest, it also pulls the shoulder down posteriorly. So it inferiorly, posteriorly pulls the scapula down. Pretty important, because if that shoulder blade is rotated forward anteriorly, it's gonna again create that impingement. So most of us who have some type of impingement have very weak serratus anterior muscles. They call it the boxer muscle, because again, boxers would use it quite a bit. Now again, what we're looking at is the scapular glide around the rib cage. We've been talking a lot about the rib cage, so it's important that we focus on that as well. Now when the arm goes into protraction, this would typically be when the opposite hemisphere would be in flexion during gait. And recall that when that happens, the leg on the same hemisphere is in extension, meaning that the butt would be in flexion. So his glute would be flexed to hold his pelvic line so that he can orient his rib cage the right way. So again, he's gonna push into the wall, glide the shoulder blade around the ribs forward. He's gonna clench the glute, and then he's gonna breathe out and slide that arm back around the rib cage. He's gonna breathe in, press the shoulder around the rib cage, holding the glute, and then breathe out, pull the ribs down, and glide the scapula back to its resting position. Breathe in, push through, and we're gonna wanna see a lot of glide through that scapula without the thoracic rotation, and breathe out, gliding that shoulder back. Okay, beautiful. Scapulothoracic glide. Now again, the serratus is going to help to hold that shoulder back. If at any point you go through this position, the shoulder begins to shrug and you start to feel pinching in the front of the shoulder or even in the back of the shoulder, you're gonna wanna reduce that range of motion and maybe even bring the arm down just a little bit. It's not a ton of load on this hip, again, or on the shoulder. He's just working basically maybe 15, 20 pounds of pressure from his body weight. And again, he's keeping his head in line with his thorax, in line with his pelvis, and making the movement happen around the rib cage. Do 2 sets of 20 on both sides of the body, and that brings you to the end of the strength phase. All right, guys, that brings us to the end of another segment of Design to Move. Remember, this one was on subacromial impingement. It basically means that the space from the humerus or the upper arm bone between the joint surface and the humeral head becomes compressed. And then we have the rotator cuff impinge down on or pinch down on. Now that can lead to all sorts of injuries down the road. If we start to erode with that, we get a lot of fluid buildup, and then the whole shoulder joint becomes unstable. That can lead to pain into the neck, into the cranium. So a lot of this is preventable and it's typical. So we want to make sure that we understand if there is pain and it's chronic pain, you may want to approach this by going into a physician and taking a look at it. There might be something serious. If this is just something where you exercise, you're doing some pushing or pulling and you feel that irritation in the shoulder, a lot of times it's just because it's not generally stable enough at the scapula. And by reducing those muscle groups around the pecs and the lats, your bigger superficial muscle groups, it's going to help to realign the shoulders and get the intrinsics, the smaller muscle groups, to hold those shoulders back. Also remember that the placement of the shoulder is relative to the rib cage. So if we don't engage the diaphragm in the right way, our breathing muscles, by supporting the ribs with our abdominals like we did today, then the placement of the shoulders are going to be impacted. So we want to make sure that we get that in alignment and recognize that the body moves as a collective whole. Again, if you have questions on any of this stuff, we would love to hear from you. Remember, we do give you a virtual assessment for free if you want the specifics on your own body, and you can reach out to us at admin@fluidhealthandfitness.com. Again, we have the blog on the topic in the description below, so make sure to check that out. And we will see you next week for another episode of Design to Move. Stay in motion, guys. We'll see you soon.